Fun, fun, fun. This should be interesting, man. Well,
Think so too.
yeah. So it just kicked off.
If I start going off on tangent too long, man, stop me. Bring me back.
No, I'm not worried. I'm not worried. I'll moderate as needed.
Gotcha.
We'll give a chance for a few more people to join, then we'll get it popped off.
All right. Are you already on Facebook?
Yep.
Is it the Emmanuel again?
Yep. And I just started a watch party on mine.
All right, I will do the same. Facebook.
Yep.
Is it the Emmanuel again?
Yep. There it is. Sounds like we're coming through clear. Hey, what's up, Larissa? All right. We'll give it a few seconds, man, then we'll get going.
How many watch parties can you do at a time?
As many as you want. It don't matter.
Oh, okay. Well, look at here. I did not know that. Praise.
Boy, look at here.
God.
Won't he do it?
Won't he do it?
All right.
All right.
We're gonna dive into it, man. No more delays. Once again, I'm Damian Thompson, pastor of Emmanuel Baptist Church, and my brother introduced himself.
I am Lakunta Farmer, educator at Ballard High School. I teach African American history, amongst other things that I do at Ballard. Been teaching for 20 some odd years, so hopefully that helps this situation.
There we go. So the aim here is pretty simple, man. We're gonna try to. There's a lot going on in the nation. We're gonna try to add some education. Kind of our goal is to try to figure out how did we get here. What was the journey that brought us to the place that we are in terms of race relations and America specifically. But in order to understand that prism, we're gonna widen the scope of our globe a little bit and start with some things about this fundamental evil that has been the black eye in America and throughout the world over the years, and that is slavery. So we're going to talk about slavery tonight and try to unpack as best we can the suitcase that is slavery and the effects thereof. So we're going to go ahead and dive right into it. Man, let's just start here. Lakunta, tell us about the history of slavery. How long has slavery been around? And let's talk about the history. I think some folks think it was only around for about 4 or 5 years, and help us with our memory lapse.
Well, slavery actually started way back when. I mean, I know a lot of us are readers of the Bible. A lot of us know, certain things. Well, we all know the Egyptians actually were the first to enslave people. So Africa's earliest history, slavery has been around. Now, it's not the slavery that went on in America that it's called chattel slavery, but we'll get into that a little bit later as well. But it's not that same type of slavery. We know the Egyptians enslaved the Hebrews, the systemic, the Mediterranean, and Nubian blacks. But a lot of it in Africa was one tribe was more dominant than another tribe. The other tribe didn't have some things. So what they ended up doing was, in exchange for goods, they had services.
Okay.
Right? So that was a different type of slavery that and you would it's pretty much indentured servitude, right?
Right.
So with your indentured servitude, there was a lot of opportunity, especially in Africa, a lot of opportunity to still be to gain your I guess you want to say your not really freedom, but your God, it's blank. Mine just went blank. Wow. To gain your notoriety, like there was levels of slavery. If you was a poor slave and you worked, there was still a class system within the slavery, within the slaves as well. So you had your nobility, you had your notoriety, but there was still a class system of slaves. And the slave, there was inner intercoastal slave trade. So the interior of Africa was already doing some sort of slave trade. Now there was also different types of ways that you could get enslaved as well. So if you owed somebody money, right, or something for goods and you couldn't pay it back, you went into slavery. Right. If in fact you needed protection from some other group or some other tribe, you could become a indentured servant and now you have the protection of whatever tribe you just became an indentured servant to.
Right. That sounds a lot like gangs today.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And so it kind of worked out in that favor. But of course, there was a knock on the door from the Europeans after the fall of Constantinople. So Europe was practicing slavery as well, but they were doing it in an indentured type situation too. They did have a lot of different. Well, to think about it, most of Europe, if you weren't nobility, you were working for somebody, so you were actually enslaved as far as an indentured servant in that way. The difference is you didn't have a opportunity to get on a higher class level within that slavery, right? If you depending on your job, you got a little more advancement, but it didn't enhance your family by any means. But there was a knock on the door in Africa from Europe after the fall of Constantinople. They needed more bodies. They needed more bodies to rebuild. They needed more bodies to farm and things like that. So they turned to Africa. And with that turning to Africa, it didn't happen like everybody thinks. Everybody thinks that Europe came in and just started kicking the door in and taking slaves. Didn't happen that way at all. What happened was when the conquistadors and the European leaders came in, they literally were asking the tribes and going to the kings and like, hey, this is what we have. We have these guns. We have these armor. We have these sharp swords. We got things that you don't have. And you guys have silks. You have all of these resources, but your major resource that you have is these human bodies, right? So we need these human bodies. So what can we do? They had to get permission from the bigger tribes to actually trade.
Right.
So in these bigger tribes,
people, huh?
Go ahead, huh?
The bartering of people.
The bartering of people. So these bigger tribes was like, you know what? We can use this to our advantage. We got these little tribes and our enemies that are causing all these issues with us. We know how to get rid of them, right? So they literally were helping the Europeans trap these slaves and set up slave traps all over the coast of Africa. Now, they would not let the Europeans go into the interior of Africa.
Okay.
Originally. They didn't let them go into the interior.
Confined to the coast.
Right. They were confined to the coast. They allowed the Europeans to build forts, which are pretty much slave forts that sat on different areas in that on the coast. And that was what ushered in. And that's how they got most slaves. They caught them. They trapped them. They put them in these forts. They held them. They kind of, I guess you could say, breaded them into being ready to be a slave. And that's how they ended up on the Middle Passage. You know what I mean? So that is actually the length of where slavery came from.
Okay. So they're now they have this trade, right? You got the African leaders who basically struck a deal with the European leaders to say, we got people and you got textiles and guns and things that we need. Let's make a trade. You give us the supply that we need and we'll supply you with the people that you lack.
Exactly.
So when did it start transitioning from the trade? Because I know that was happening in Europe. When did it start moving? You mentioned the Middle Passage. When did it start moving across the water into the Americas?
So if we're going to talk about going across the water, the original person that brought people across, the Africans about the idea of slavery into the Americas was Christopher Columbus, right?
So, you mean the guy that discovered America?
Yeah, the guy that was actually looking for Asia and India and kind of ran across the that guy, Chris Colombo. But Chris brings the idea of slavery to the Americas, but we'll talk about him in a minute too. But if we fast forward, when he got back to Spain, he told Spain about all this vast land and all this beautiful happenings, and he told them about the people that lived in America, that the natives were of good bodies, they were sound, they were strong, they were fast, they could swim long, the women swim longer than the men. They were just an impressive group, and they're so humble, and they were fit for servitude. Right. So when Spain ended up going to Africa, they was like, oh, this is what Chris was talking about too. There's some here that's just like in America. So you know what? Let's go to let's get a bunch of them. Let's go to where Chris ran into land, and they started farming what was sugarcane at the time in Jamaica and Haiti. So he didn't land in the actual United States of America. He hit the Caribbean. Right? He actually landed in the Bahamas, and he ran into the Awak people. And the Awak tribe was a very strong tribe of almost 500,000. And what happened to them. But we'll talk a little bit more about what happened to them here in a second. But that is how it actually came to America. And the date that everybody knows is 1619, when Jamestown was founded and the slaves were brought to Jamestown. Oh, let's rewind a little bit. So Spain controlled what was called La Florida too. So that was Florida, Georgia, and I think parts of South Carolina, right? Mm-hmm. Florida, Georgia, South Carolina. I think that was around 1520 that they established that. Well, they came to a part in Florida and built a colony called St. Augustine. And St. Augustine, Florida is actually still there, and it still has some pretty historical stuff there. If you ever get to go visit, anybody ever get to go visit there, take a look. It's got some fantasizing things there to go check out. But in 1565, they established St. Augustine. The problem with St. Augustine and the Spanish there were still natives there too, right? When they got there, the Spanish kept getting sick, so they had to leave St. Augustine. And who did they leave there?
The slave.
The enslaved people, and then you had the natives as well. So mixing those two together. But fast forward, everybody knows 1619. That's when it came to the actual colonies in Jamestown, Jamestown, Virginia, not West Virginia. Excuse me.
Okay, so now we're in the States, right? Killer Christopher Columbus,
Killer Chris,
came over and kind of started this process of taking over a new land, right? This new territory that hadn't been inhabited by Europe, but was in fact being lived upon by Native Americans, people who are already here, growing and cultivating the land. So 1619, they land in Virginia, and one of the things you mentioned about the sugar cane, all these different crops that had to be harvested. I do think that sugarcane ends up being a major player in the process of the what they felt was the necessity of forced servitude, because sugarcane, while it's really, really valuable, it does have a very specific process of harvesting that it's time sensitive, right? Harvest the sugarcane. So during harvest time, you need probably more people than you would normally need. And fast forwarding your economy using free labor can really jumpstart this sugarcane business and take you where you need to be. So I threw you some questions earlier, and I was gonna ask this, so I'm gonna go and throw it out. I'm like, did Christopher Columbus discover America, and why is he the devil?
So, in my humble opinion about Killer Chris honestly did not discover America. So America was already inhabited. It was already, it had people that have traditions for years and years before Chris got here. It was a vast place with a lot of different things. I mean, at that point, there was gold like flakes floating in the rivers and land. You know what I mean? So it was a resourceful place. It was very fertile. The soil was ready to go. But no, to answer that question, Chris did not discover America. Now, why is Chris the devil? See, that is a fantastic question. I'm glad you asked that. So Chris Columbus was a different breed. You know what I mean? He wasn't the richest guy in the world, but what he was good at was selling, right?
Right.
At least according to the Spaniards. That's what they knew. They thought Chris was one of the smartest guys to ever sail the ocean blue. And honestly, he pubbed himself that way. Like, he wanted people to understand, I am the famous Christopher Columbus. But, you know, when he first started trying to get expeditions, he couldn't get them because Spain would not back him. Right?
They wouldn't pay for it.
Wouldn't pay for it at all. But he eventually talked them into saying, hey, I can get to India faster than anybody else, which in turn I can get to Asia as well. And I can get to these places, which can help us with trade. It can help us with all of these things that could bring Spain more what? Money and notoriety.
Right.
And Spain was looking to be world dominant, I would say.
Yeah, no doubt.
Spain was looking for a way to just be the world leaders in trade, the world leaders in just territory owned and everything, which eventually bites them in the butt. But so that's what they were looking to do. So Christopher Columbus talked him into doing that. He sails out with the Nina Pinta and Santa Maria, I think, I believe his name is.
Yeah. The whatchamacallit, the Nina Pinta, whatchamacallit.
Yeah, and the whatchamacallit. So they set out with these boats to go to Asia and to India. Well, it was nighttime. Chris got a little lost. You know, the wind started blowing. Some sailors were dying because they were on the ocean for so long. He ends up in America, right? So let me tell you what kind of guy Christopher Columbus was. Now, you got to talk about the character of the man. So the character of this dude was, he was a liar, one, because he really didn't know what was in India or what was in Asia. He definitely didn't know what was in America.
Right.
He was greedy. He was he liked to take credit for things. So, for instance, taking credit for things, he told everybody on the ship, if you see land, the first person that sees land will get 10,000 pesos, right?
Okay.
A guy woke up and was like, hey, I got land, it's land. So he's waking everybody up. Chris says, no, I saw it first. I saw it yesterday. I just kept it quiet. So that man didn't get paid. Right? What kind of dude is this, right? He was in search of a name. He was in search of fame. And overall, he was the world leader in genocide at that moment, at that time, right? So they got these boats. They got all these. They got over there. And when they got to America, they were met by the AWOC people who saw them coming. And they were like, oh, my God, look at these big old boats and these iron men, not Tony Stark, but these iron men, right? Yeah. These iron men got these sharp things and they didn't know what it was. So when they came off, they looked at them like, oh, it's other people that we can actually trade with. So they started offering their own things. They started offering their spears, their cotton, food, everything. They were just bringing it to them, and they were like, "Oh, look what we can give you guys." So in turn, the Spaniards had their swords drawn and ready to go, and they're just looking around like, "Oh, this is amazing." They're grabbing the swords, they're cutting their hands, like, "Oh, that wasn't supposed to happen. Why is it cutting me?" They didn't understand those things. So on the flip side of that, Christopher Columbus is looking at these people like, "Wow, look at the way they're built. They're well built. They move around, but they're ignorant. They don't know anything." Mm-hmm. With them not knowing anything, it gave them the opportunity to take over. So immediately, Christopher Columbus, after all the exchange and all the pleasantries and trying to teach each other what the language was, nightfall comes, they kidnap 100 to 300 people, get them to try to learn the language so they can in turn tell them information so they can then go into the land and get these resources. Wow. But what do you think the number one question Christopher Columbus was trying to get out of them?
I don't know.
Where was the gold?
Okay.
Where's the gold? Because he promised Spain that he was going to bring back barrels and barrels of gold.
Right.
He didn't find that. He did find some gold, but he didn't find any of that. What he ended up finding was more silks. He found more crops. He found more sugar cane. He found all these things that was not gold, but he realized it was a tradable thing, right? He realized all these things were tradable, and the biggest thing he realized that I can trade these people too.
Right.
So I can bring them back and then I can make money off of them.
Yeah. And so he killed the people that he found not valuable and kept the people that he found valuable. And that's why every Columbus Day I pay him zero respect.
Zero.
And so, I think last year I posted on Facebook on Columbus Day. I said, happy Columbus Day. I said, so just drive up to the house that you like, pull up, put your car in the driveway and claim it as your own.
Right.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks, Killer Chris. Anyway, let's get off Columbus just for a second. So
yeah.
I did think that it's important, to note that it seems like from what you're saying about these trade, the government or the tribes in Africa saw this opportunity with the Europeans, and they traded people because of this opportunity to get textiles and guns. And then Christopher Columbus and the move towards the Americas, he saw this opportunity with these people. So I think people always assume that slavery is about hatred, just hatred of another people. Yeah. But it seems to me by what you're saying is that slavery is driven by money
all day,
or the pursuit of power and money and how to get there. Talk about that for a little bit, if you don't mind.
So in that thought process, if we look at, let's just fast forward. If we look at the slavery in America, it was literally driven by money, right? Okay. So originally, when the Europeans came to America, they came with indentured slaves. Servants. They came with indentured servants, and these indentured servants were all white, right?
Okay.
They weren't that strong. They weren't that durable. They came over. They got sick. They tricked the pill. They tricked the Indians into believing there was a Thanksgiving that everybody should sit down at a table, and they ended up taking them out too and forcing them into other lands. That somehow we still forcing them into other lands now, but. But all of these things were happening. So all of that was about money. Now rewind all the way to Africa. It was about the economic growth of all of these places, right? So if you look at the economic growth of Africa at the time, well, let's just go to Egypt. All the pyramids, all those things in Egypt. The kingdoms that were built, even let's talk about, just the different lands and different things that were created were all off the backs of slaves.
Right. Including the White House.
Right. Of enslaved people. And all of it, say again?
I said including the White House.
And all of these things, including the White House, right? So all of these things, the more land you have, the bigger your palace, the bigger your kingdom, the more you are respected, right? You the king of the world. So that was happening in Africa. So fast forward to America. So we talk about America. So think about this. If the Civil War, if the South had really seceded from the North, and they kept producing cotton, they would literally produce. They literally at the time was producing 75% of the world's cotton, and creating more millionaires per capita in the Mississippi Valley than anywhere in the nation. And that's almost fourth in the world at that point.
Right.
the fourth richest nation in the world, if in fact the Confederacy had decided to succeed from the nation and be by themselves. Right. So, but what had to happen? The economy was pretty much built on slavery. So the commercial enterprise for the wilderness was bad. Like, so think, when they first got here, there was nothing but trees. There was nothing, all of that needed to be cleared out. Right. So who better to clear these things out but some well-bodied men? You know, and think about this too. So in Africa, when they were taking slaves, most enslaved people were women. Right? It was a 3-to-1 thing that more women was enslaved. When it came to America's chattel slavery, we talk about 15-to-1. 15 men to every one woman. Because you needed these well-bodied people to start build the agricultural economy, because that's all they had at that point, you know, to start exploring the lands. There were African guides that helped them get through, you know, some of the muck and the mire of what was happening in the nation of the forest and all of that, because of course Africa had trees and things like that. So they were kind of used to trying to get through forests and things like that. So they had people that were actually hired and kind of held at a high esteem. You know, they almost like what's my man's name on Django? Steven?
Yeah, Steven.
You had a couple of Stevens that were leading the rest of the white our white brothers to these places to help build this economy. And as they were building this economy, and a lot of them just wanted a new life. You know, all they wanted to get away from England, they wanted to get away from Britain, they wanted to get away from all these people, but they wanted a new life. And the climate of the land and all of this, when they got here, was so vast, and they just needed help doing it. Right. So when they started building this economy, then that's where it was. And what ended up happening was economic necessity ended up trumping morality.
Right, because you think if only the strong survive, you know, like the slaves' presence added strength to a very new infrastructure and country, right? You know, I find it really, really interesting that, you know, during the time of the colonies, you know, from the 1600s all the way through the 1600s into the majority, 3/4 of the 1700s, the colonies kind of lived under British control, and for the most part, they were okay with that. I mean, you think about it, that's hundreds of years that they've spanned under another country that's across the water's control. It wasn't until the early 1720s that they even had a thought. The first person even started saying, "Hey, we are here. We're doing the work. We're doing the labor. We have enough to create our own economy here." And they would not be able to do that. No new country had been able up until that point to live independently of their mother country. Up until that point, America would have been the first. And the only reason they were able to do that is because of the free labor that they stole in slavery. So I tell people all the time, you know, I was working with a cat. He was talking about how he didn't understand why his buddy didn't ever have any money. He was like, man, every time we go out on the weekend, he always talking about he don't have no money to buy drinks and all that kind of stuff. I was like, wait a minute. You live with your mother.
Right.
And because you don't have to pay to live, your money is different than somebody who's out here paying rent. And likewise, America did not, they had the security of Great Britain without the financial burden of paying for labor, which gave them this robust economy. And in an effort of greed, you know, they said, I don't want to send any taxes back. You know, I'm making all this money hand over fist, and they want to tax the money I make. I want to cut that off. I want all the money to myself. It's right. Ambitious notion, man.
Exactly. Taxation without representation, right?
Right. Which happens all the time now. Anyway, uh, so man, let's move this along. So you mentioned
Okay.
about cotton, and a lot of people refer to it as King Cotton because the harvesting of cotton and America being the epicenter of the cotton production and the cotton trade throughout the world. Explain how cotton ended up causing this great divide between the North and the South in America, and I do think that ended up leading to what we saw in the Civil War and the like. So let's talk about cotton for a bit.
So before cotton became king, right? Cotton was just little brother at the time. Right. So what was king was rice, tobacco, and sugarcane.
Okay.
Right. And then you had cotton behind that, and then after that you had silks and fabrics and things like that. In 1794, Eli Whitney created this machine called the cotton gin. Okay. Right. This machine, it combined cotton boils and it combed the cotton boil, combed them and pulled the seeds out of the cotton where originally enslaved people were using their hands. And I mean, I've seen movies of it depicted and seeing the bloody hands of slaves, enslaved people. We've all seen it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting blood on the cotton as well. So right. To avoid that happening, they would put it in this machine. He created this machine. It would comb it out and seed it out in a very short time, right? Mm-hmm. One slave could pick seeds out of cottons at 10 pounds a time. The cotton gin could produce 100 pounds at the same time.
Wow. Okay.
So,
game changer.
Go ahead.
I said it was a game changer, huh?
It was the most significant game change in agricultural history. Right. So you got this cotton gin now, and now they are producing so much cotton that the world needs cotton. Everybody needs clothes. Everybody needs, and the biggest transportation was sails. So if I can build bigger cargo ships, I have to have bigger sails. So, and if I got a fleet of boats, I need sails.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and what people don't know, in the North, there was his name just slid straight out of my head, but it was a black man that owned a sail making shop that was a millionaire before anybody else was.
Wow.
And his name will pop back in my head in a little bit. But anyway, so that's how cotton ended up being king cotton, because everybody needed cotton. They started steam engines too, and you needed weaving machines to help doing that too. So you had steam engines that helped along with the cotton gin, and you went from 100 bales of cotton, 100 bales of cotton to 100,000 bales of cotton or more. So that's what you get, king cotton.
So what ends up happening, and let's just be clear. You have slaves throughout the new America, right? So now we're in and around the time of the mid 1800s and 1850s, and there's starting to be this unrest, right? You got different political parties. You have the North and the South, which are starting to have difficulty really over the money, because at that time, the South is basically funding the entire country. Okay. Yeah. But the federal government at the time, which had a smaller footprint than we would know it, started trying to rein in and hone in that money and starting to control that money. And also, there were leaders that started to say that because of the presence of the money in the South, that the South had too much political influence in the federal government. So those states in the South, they were using their money and influence to kind of push policies throughout the entire nation, and the northern states had a problem with it. So I kind of want this to lead into our conversation about Abraham Lincoln and the controversy about him becoming president. And even when he announced his candidacy, which caused just a lot of strife within the country.
Right.
You know, the people in the South wanted to keep the states' rights and govern their borders like they saw fit, and the people in the North wanted basically for you to send it. They wanted to go back to this whole taxation without representation thing. Mississippi, right. I know you made a lot of money from cotton. Send it up here to me. I'm gonna tell you how to pay for it. So
exactly.
Yeah. So let's talk about Abraham Lincoln. I don't want to, you know, dog our forefathers and all that kind of stuff, but you know, did Abraham Lincoln go down the road of Emancipation Proclamation and all that because he just was in love with black people and he wanted to see our progress? Was that the logic, or was it a little bit more than that?
It is a lot more than that. So Abraham grew up poor anyway. You know what I mean? Abraham was always a tall, slender dude. He was poor. He didn't have a whole lot, but his family, you know, was smart enough to educate him very well. And what he did was made himself available to learn these things. He got into politics. He learned the ropes and did so many different things to afford his way into government. Okay. So once he did that, yeah, it made people mad because some of his thought processes came from a poor thought, you know, a poor state of mind, right. You know, because he saw the struggles, but he didn't live in the South all his life. He lived in the North most of his life, which didn't need a lot of what was going on in the South. For instance, you talked about kind of how, and you asked this question, but I failed to answer it, so I'll answer it now. How that cotton ended up being a reason for the split. So you couldn't grow cotton in the North, right? The land wasn't fertile enough. It was cold. It was rocky. You know, you couldn't grow cotton in the South. So yes, cotton was in the North. So the South was the key place to grow this cotton. Most plantation, and think about this too. Most plantation designs were designed to grow cotton and have the quarters for people to come out of the slave quarters straight to the cotton field and then straight back to the slave quarters. So all of these things were happening. Abraham Lincoln knew of them, but he wasn't privy to it at all times. Okay. Right. But Abe was a politician at the end of the day. He knew what to say to people to get them going his way. He knew different lingo to get people on his side. Now, was everybody on his side? No. Was everybody in the North on his side? No. But he was the best candidate at the time. So you take the lesser of two evils. He was the most boisterous. He was the most articulate. He threw out policies that did help people. He threw out policies to get people on his side. So sound familiar? Anyway? Yeah. But as far as him becoming president in 1860, was it 1860? Yeah, 1860. Him becoming president, he was put in a crazy little position, right? So the South was mad at the North was mad at the South wanted to control the government. They were actually making it so they would put people in place to take a lot of the seats from the Senate. Okay. And take a lot of the seats from the House of Representatives. They were putting people in place. And like you said, to create these laws that benefited the South, but didn't necessarily benefit the North. Okay. Right. But here was the kicker. The Northern people thought of themselves as smarter because they were doing a lot of construction. They were doing a lot of just work that took thought process, where you picking cotton, you could be the dumbest man in the world and you could pick some cotton. Mm-hmm. So the North thought they were better than the South. The South felt like they worked harder than the North, and the Northern people were lazy. So you had a ethical thought process that was a battle too. So now you got people, the Northern people thinking the Southern people don't need to be in government because they don't know what they're talking about. They're thinking that the North is thinking the South is just a place where rural people live and don't don't have a clue on what government needs to do. Well, of course, the smarter people live in the North is what they thought. So the Northern people said, we know what to do with the money. We know how to get this trade going. We're trying to build America to being the best place in the world. And Abraham Lincoln stuck in the middle, like, I don't want to lose this nation. And I can see it being torn apart at the seams right now.
Yeah. You know, and it's interesting because, you know, I think Mississippi and South Carolina were the first states to secede. And
yes,
you know, their secession was really was once it was steeped financial. You know, they didn't want abolitionist influence in the government, right? So so the presence of Abraham Lincoln posed a very particular problem. Who I think at the time would have been the first sitting president that didn't have deep roots in the South or the colonial core. You know, he wasn't from the 13 colonies. He had roots outside of this kind of sphere of inherent quote unquote America. So you got these leaders in Alabama, I mean in Mississippi and South Carolina, Jefferson Davis and the like, who were kicking up a whole lot of noise, saying that if you elect Abraham Lincoln, we are going to basically take our ball and go home. And
exactly.
And that's exactly what they did. And so they wrote up these articles where they declared themselves independent. And man, you said an interesting thing, that they had enough finances to sustain themselves. That the Confederacy could have worked financially. They would have been a rich nation at that time. The problem is the North and the South. The reason why America even worked then and still works now is that this marriage between the North and the South made sense. It benefited everybody, and slavery as the financier of all of that, right? You got the industrialized North, which are making heavy machinery and guns and weapons, and the South really has the money that had been bankrolling all that stuff, which ends up because they were cultivating cotton, they couldn't cultivate gun development, right? And then when it split, you see one side that has more people and more money, and another side that has more weaponry, and the North is quote unquote winning, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So man, the Emancipation Proclamation, I'm fascinated. I'm fascinated by the document. I'm fascinated by people's ignorance about the emancipation and what it did and what it was, and also the subsequent acts that actually freed the slave. So let's talk about, and I don't want us to go too much longer. We've got about 15 minutes on this, and then we'll start trying to land the plane.
Gotcha.
You got the Emancipation as a document.
Yes.
First signed in 1863 and ratified in 65. Is that right? I got that right?
Yeah. Well, he made the announcement January 1st, 1863, and then it was ratified in 1865, finally. But it really didn't go into effect in the South until 1888, 68, sometime in that process.
Right.
But the actual Emancipation Proclamation, his original plan was he did not want to end slavery, right? He just wanted to get everybody back together. He wanted a more perfect union, right? He wanted everybody to be together. He didn't want to lose anything. He didn't want the South to lose out. He didn't want the North to lose out. But he knew something had to be done, right? Yeah. And his original thought process was, if I end slavery, it's going to cause, now check this out, it's going to cause unrest in this country. There will be protests and there will be riots.
Say it again, bro. So his fear from stopping slavery was why?
His fear for stopping slavery was that it would cause a nationwide unrest, which would cause protest, rioting, and looting.
Wow. Interesting.
So he didn't want that to happen. So what he decided to do was draw up a plan and try to give the South different things. Hey, if you got 100 slaves, why don't you just knock that back to about 50 and let them be free, and then we can give you your compensation for that, whatever it may be. That wasn't going to work because the South was like, nah, we need all 100,000 of these slaves down here, so you ain't doing nothing. You ain't getting none of them, right? So he had to come up with his plan, but his major goal while making this plan was not to lose the border states. If he lost the border states, he knew that they'd be in trouble.
And who were the border states?
The border states were Kentucky, Maryland. No, the border states were. Hold on, let me make sure I'm telling you this right because I don't want to tell you no lie. Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, and Missouri. Right. Those were known as the border states, and he needed them to stay with the Union because if in fact they went with the Confederacy, he would risk losing not the nation, but his military prominence.
Okay.
So if in fact he lost that, he didn't have enough military power to fight back. He knew he had the South with those border states. He knew he had the South in kind of a corner. Right. And at some point he knew we could overrun him. And the issue of slavery, even after he knew he couldn't risk losing them, so he kind of bagged up off of the slavery thing, and because the border states were kind of teeter-tottering, they didn't know which way to join and which way to go. But you didn't have a lot of slavery in Maryland, but you had people in Maryland that were from the South that believed in slavery. You didn't have you had a 50-50 in Missouri, 50-50 in Kentucky. If you go to northern Kentucky from Louisville had slaves, so let's not even play that game. So if you go to Boone County and up towards Ohio, you had people that didn't need to have anything to do with slavery. So they were more inclined to be with the North. Well, the deeper south you got in Kentucky, they were more inclined to be in the South. And that was the same thing with Missouri as well. Right. But as these plans were going back and forth, Lincoln literally was like, this issue of slavery just keeps coming up. Like I got all these, at the time, Republicans that were on my back about we need to end slavery. And actually, the slave trade ended in 1808, right? Between 1808 and the start of the Civil War, there were 250,000 enslaved people still smuggled into the United States. This was causing problems for a lot of situations in the North, right? So the South was benefiting, the North wasn't, as you said, but this was causing problems like, hey, guys, we made a law. You're disturbing this law. You're not following the treaty. You're breaking law. So we need to do something else. So this issue of slavery kept haunting Abraham Lincoln. So he finally decided to come up with a plan to go against slavery, and which was, in essence, the Emancipation Proclamation, right? So under this plan, the border states will receive federal funds in exchange for passing state laws to abolish slavery over time.
Mm-hmm.
And although a lot of those states were still loyal to the Union, the border states weren't ready all the way to end the slave system too. So originally, all 4 states rejected that plan, where he had to come back with another plan. He explained that the Confederacy would be crippled without slavery, right? But he also decided that he could use his constitutional power as commander-in-chief to end slavery in certain areas. And if he did it in a strategic way, he could probably get away with ending slavery altogether.
Right.
So he began forming this Emancipation Proclamation. And it was a step-by-step way to really end slavery and why ending slavery was important. But he made this in 1862. He didn't make the announcement until January 1st of 1863. He was waiting on something big, right? So they were already in the war. He was waiting on something big to happen, a big win from the Union Army. And after the Battle of Antietam on New Year's Eve, the next day when the Union won that battle, he announced the Emancipation Proclamation.
Right.
So and that's how that got put out there.
And it's interesting because it's believed that without the Emancipation Proclamation and without the allowing of the North Army being populated by these slaves that were freed with the emancipation, I mean that bolstered their army a great deal.
Considerably.
Yeah, for a really, really bloody war.
Right.
At that point, the North and the South were dying at record rates, and they had already been 2 years into the war because the Civil War starts in 61,
right,
and it doesn't end until 65.
Right.
So you're talking about a very bloody and long war that ended up getting kind of a shot in the arm with enlisting people to fight, quote unquote, for freedom, which ended up kind of not quite working out like we thought.
Right.
There were several promises made in that whole fighting for freedom thing that never materialized.
Right. Still waiting on 40 acres.
Yeah, man,
and a couple of mules.
Yeah, so we'll try to get into that next time because that's a lot to unpack. These promises that were made to these fighting people
Right.
that just never came to fruition. Man,
Yep.
let me put this question like this.
Okay.
It's been all over the news lately about these Confederate symbols going away and coming down. I grew up in Mississippi, so in my mind, the Confederate flag is Mississippi state flag for all intents and purposes. It's
Right.
almost an exact replica. But personally, when I see the Confederate flag, it does send very, very negative images, feelings, and emotions to me. Why do you think that there's such willingness from people who seem to be real patriots and all about America? Why does it seem like there's this love affair for the Confederacy and a commitment to Confederate leaders? I thought about it. Kentucky has in their state capital. Is it Jefferson Davis in the state capitol?
He was. He just got escorted out the other day.
Yeah, but being that Kentucky has no connection with Jefferson Davis, why
At all?
Where does the love affair come from? And kind of, I mean, let's just talk about to me, it's a psychosis, but what's up with that?
I think a lot of it was we may have lost this war, but we didn't lose who we are. We're still the superior race. We're still the superior part of the country. We still produce more than anybody else at that time, at that standpoint. I think a lot of it was a reminder that we're still here.
Okay.
And in pockets they were. They were in the government, they were in the military, they were doctors, they were lawyers, they were all the people that end up being KKK members. But you see, and I don't know. I think the love affair with just understanding a Southern mentality. They think of it as it's heritage, it's history. We should love our history of our nation. This is part of our history. But I don't see nobody in Germany riding around with swastikas on the back of their cars on their license plate as their state flag. I don't see that at all.
It's illegal. They wouldn't allow it.
They would not allow it, but we allowed it here in the United States because the North had to give the South something. Right? They had to let them know you're still important to us. We know you lost. Well, you know what? Just go and fly your flag. It's not going to mean anything, but just fly your flag. Right. So I think that was the mistake that was made way back then, that we allowed them after the loss, after this major loss in the Civil War, we allowed it to become something that stood for white supremacy and knowing that we are still here. Stay in your place, boy.
Yeah.
Because we are going to create these laws. And a lot of those laws that were created, the Jim Crow laws, the black codes, all of these things started being created. Even the people that were in place in different governors in different southern states, Arkansas, Alabama, all of these people wanted to make sure that all the black people stayed in their place.
Okay.
And that creates the problem.
Yeah, Charles Holloway said that the flags, the statues, the symbols were used to intimidate people.
Right.
Stay in your place. You know, a lot of them were put in place as kind of to me, it seems like a rallying cry. You know, almost like the bat signal for white supremacy. You know,
right.
Put this up to let us know, hey man, we still got it. Man, we got so much to cover. You know, I do think we did a decent job of just talking about slavery as a whole and kind of the institution. But as I say that, you know, Kanye West famously said, slavery is a choice. And I want to turn the conversation to talk about slavery as the institution and some of the effects and the mental, psychological effects that the institution of slavery had, rather than just the moments and the people who were enslaved.
So, as you were talking earlier and talked about the flag, and it was a reminder, I started thinking that, can you imagine the trauma that anybody that was enslaved, that just came out of slavery, can you imagine the trauma that they have? Can you imagine a man that's trying to raise his family? If he thinks back to his mom and his dad and his grandparents and how half his family might be on the other side of the United States, and he has no clue because that family got torn apart 3, 4, 5 times. Can you imagine the trauma that runs along with that? So in your head, if I see this flag and I know in my head what this flag represents, like, I'm going to back down because I already think I'm inferior enough in these white people's minds. I can't challenge them because they're going to come get me. Right. And I thought about this too, like when going back to riots and protesting, when Lincoln finally decided to tell this great plan about the Emancipation Proclamation and slaves were free, there was a number of violent protests. A number of violent protests that the South, with this flag of waving and these hoods are on. See, that's what people don't put it together. Like the people that was wearing these KKK uniforms, also on that same uniform with that KKK signature, they had a Confederate flag as well later on. Like if I've been enslaved for all these years, and my family's been enslaved all these years, I'm still going to live in fear. Yeah. And I'm still going to tell my family that comes after me, you better be careful what you say to these people.
Yeah.
Because they going to come get you.
And let me say this, you know, my mother, whose birthday is today, happy birthday, Mama. It's
happy birthday,
Mom. You know, Hattiesburg, Mississippi. You know, especially lately because Louisville's been in the news, and I'm trying my best to try to make a positive change. You know, I had a conversation with my mom who was seriously concerned for my safety and well-being, and let me explain why. My mom grew up in a small town called Richton, Mississippi. One of her teachers growing up was a lady named Miss Damer. Who had a husband. His name was Vernon Damer. Vernon Damer, around in the 60s, was a civil rights activist from Hattiesburg who was trying to get Black people registered to vote. And KKK came to Hattiesburg and killed Vernon Damer.
Wow.
That's my mom's teacher, right?
Right.
So now, you think about she don't want me to make too much noise. You know what I mean?
Right.
And I understand that out of fear, that the same thing that happened to her teacher's husband could happen to me. Now, what you have to really work on is making sure that you're not responding to ghosts. That you not allow that fear to paralyze. That we be about what every strong movement in history has done, and push past the fear and just continue on to try to do the next right thing. Right. And continue to do as many right things as you can to make systematic change.
Right. And my dad's almost the same way. So me and him, because a couple weeks ago, actually 2 Fridays ago, I went to his house first and told him I was going to the protest. And he looked at me. My dad's 82, born in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Well, actually, he was born in White Hollow, Alabama. And White Hollow, Alabama, and grew up there between there, Mobile, Alabama, and Pascagoula and Moss Point, Mississippi. Right. So he is 82. He's seen all the protests. He's seen in 1938. He was born in 1938. So when I told him I was going to the protest, he looked at me and said, "You got protection? Don't go in there empty-handed." And I'm like, this is a peaceful protest.
Right.
He looked at me like, all right, don't believe the hype.
Right.
You know what I mean? And I understood that. And he knows he knows me. He raised me. He put this fight in me. You know what I mean? So he knows I ain't going down with like that. Not easy. But I could see the worry. And even my mom, I could see the worry, and because they've been conditioned to worry. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So that's really troubling. You know what I mean? But I understand that.
Yeah. So man, let's put a pin here, and man, try to put a bow on this thing. Okay. I think it's really obvious that the stains and the pains of slavery are still present in a number of ways. That the raping, the pillaging, the disparaging of the humanity of Black people and people of African descent over the years, over the hundreds of years, had a deep psychological and physical effect on even the Black people of today. Right. And I do think that we have to fight real hard to grow and cultivate in areas that weren't grown and cultivated during times of slavery. A smart Negro in slavery time was dangerous and risked his life being taken. But the strong, the physical prowess was kept and controlled. And I think even to this day, you think about the Laura Ingrams telling LeBron James to shut up and dribble. That mentality is still present today, that I'll love you as long as you don't cause trouble. Right. I'll support you as long as you don't shake up things. And I think the enemies of progress in America will allow you to do good as long as you don't do better. And that's where they really start having the problems. So, I think we got to keep pushing to be better, brother, and impacting not only the people we come in contact with, but sharing as much information as we can to make sure we make the change that we want.
I agree. And on that topic, I think, the mental trauma and all of that, it's a continuous pattern. So we can't really grow out of the thought process of what may happen and what can happen, because it continues to happen. Right. And we haven't been able to run away from it. We haven't been able to, I mean, we slowed it down. You know, it got slowed down, but it has never ever stopped. And I think that causes a lot of the issues in our community as well. You know, and all we can do is continue to get better, like you said. All we can do is keep pushing to do the right thing. And would you say push past that fear? Because I know you know God didn't give us that spirit of fear, but it has been instilled in a lot of us,
right?
You know, especially our older generation. It's been instilled in them, you know, because they've seen things. I know my dad has seen things. I know we don't live in Mississippi now simply because my dad has seen things and been part of things that made him have to go.
Right.
You know what I mean? And therein lies a lot of, even with me, a lot of time, distrust, angst. You know, you get anxious around certain situations. I know, and you said it too. You said it the other day. Like you talked about how you were the only Black person that works in the building for a while, and I would be nervous. I ain't gonna lie to you, and I shouldn't be, but I'd be nervous. You know what I mean? And you know, I think until we overcome those things, until we overcome where our strength should be coming from, and stand up with that strength and continue to push forward to a better time, a better generation, and a better situation for our kids and our future. Because our parents and people before us fought hard to get where we are and fought hard to get a voice. And then we got people like Candace Owens that spit on that voice and stomp on that voice. You know what I mean? Stomp on everything that is right. Like, she's dancing for these dudes. And it's sad, man. It's sad to even hear her talk. Like, where did you come from? Wherever it is, you need to go back.
And you know what really hurts my heart is, you know, she and others have been given credibility just for being opposite what you've heard Black people say. And you know, they'll cling to any voice that they feel is a Black face to agree with them, and it's just so dangerous. And you know, like I'm okay with different opinion. I actually like it. You know, I'm one of those leaders who believes that you should surround yourself with the smartest people around you that disagree with you. Right. That's how you grow. So I like you know, having a difference of thought. I don't have a problem with that. I just don't like untrained or unlearned thinking and speaking very strongly when you don't really know. That's a problem. Man, let's get ready to close. Let me just say this. I know you got a couple things that you want to share. Some shirts and stuff that you want to show the folks.
Yeah. So the shirt I have on right now, to all my K-State people that are listening, my man Lee Carter makes these shirts here, state. So get on Facebook, get online, and support Lee. And then the Thoroughbred Land shirts are made by Do Re Me Designs, and her name is Cheryl Reed. Go check them out, man. For anybody that just needs some more K-State apparel, it's good fabric, good cotton. It feels good to put on, man. I look good in it, even though I make a lot of things ugly. But this makes me look good. So I will. I greatly appreciate all those people for allowing me to wear their stuff. So if y'all got it, go get it. You know.
Yeah, that's good stuff. All right, man. Listen, you know, I will say that because the institution of slavery was financial, I do feel that the freedom thereof is financial as well. Right. That brothers and sisters, make sure you work very hard to get out of debt. Work very hard to own land, work very hard to establish businesses, work very hard to cultivate a trade, work very hard to make yourself valuable and unique so you can stay free. Freedom is about having as many choices as possible.
Definitely. definitely make sure you're out there just to gain knowledge of a lot of different things. And as Pastor said over here, that you have to definitely find your finances in a better spot. I know that the land is important. I know that your credit is important. And I know a lot of things that I try to teach my sons that they probably still ain't listening to, that to set themselves up for later. I wish I had to listen to my dad,
Right.
and now, I'm 42 years old, and just now being able to get to that point, like, it was a rough transition because I did not take that time to do that. And I don't want anybody else to find themselves in that position. So please, 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 go out, find the knowledge. If you can't read it, go research it, go look at it on YouTube or find something to go educate yourself on being a better steward of money.
Yes, sir. All right. Well, I appreciate y'all. You got time Tuesday?
I don't know. We'll make it happen.
All right. If not, I've already scheduled next Thursday. Dr. Cherie Edwards did agree to come and break down this criminal justice reform. I know you've heard a lot about defunding the police. She's going to break down kind of what that means. It does not mean get rid of all the police officers. It actually means making sure that you make a quality investment in communities. And if you raise up the communities, you'll lessen the need of the communities being policed. So that's the logic behind it. And, she's going to give a lot of information, a lot of stats, and we'll let her do her thing. So if me and Lakunta don't come on early next week, that'll be the next time together on Thursday night. I'll have that scheduled out here today. So we're excited about that. Next time me and Lakunta come on, we're going to talk about Reconstruction and Jim Crow.
Woo! Touchy subjects. Touchy.
So I appreciate everybody sharing with us. Go ahead and share this with your friends if it's been helpful for you. I appreciate you, Lakunta, for sharing with us.
I appreciate you.
Get out of here.
Peace and blessings to everybody.